My name's Daniel, I'm 26, and I graduated from law school last November. It was supposed to be one of those moments you picture when you're a kid. You know, standing there in the gown, name being called, that second of pride when you look out into the crowd and see your family cheering you on. Except that second never happened for me. I stood there, name called, walked the stage, smiled for the photo, and there was no one in the crowd for me. Not my mom, not my dad, not even a text. I still remember the exact moment I realized it, because I'd been lying to myself for weeks that it was fine, that their excuse made sense, that it wasn't personal. But when I was walking down those steps after shaking the dean's hand, I knew. It was personal. A few weeks before the ceremony, I told them the date and asked if they'd come. My mom gave me this long-winded explanation about how they had planned this trip to the coast for months, something about a timeshare they couldn't cancel without losing the money. My dad barely said anything, just nodded while looking at his phone. It's always like that. He leaves her to do the talking. I tried to act like I understood, like I was mature enough not to make it a big deal. But I think a part of me still hoped they'd surprise me. You know when you're trying to convince yourself someone cares more than they show. That's what I was doing. Replaying in my head how maybe they'd cancel the trip last minute and show up anyway. It sounds pathetic now that I'm writing it. What really broke me wasn't even their absence. It was what came after. I was on the way to dinner with a couple friends after the ceremony when my phone buzzed. My sister had posted a story on Instagram, just a casual clip of her clinking glasses at some restaurant downtown. And there they were. My mom, my dad, sitting across from her, laughing, plates of steak and wine on the table. Right there in the same city. 10 blocks from the auditorium I just walked out of. They weren't on a trip. They never were. They were just with her. With my half-sister. And her stepdad. Her stepdad's kids. They skipped my graduation to have dinner with them. I stared at that story for a long time. I don't even know why. I guess part of me was waiting for an explanation that would never come. Maybe it was old. Maybe it wasn't even from that day. But then I saw the caption. Family night out, 2 hearts, so proud of you, Jess. That's when it really sank in. It was that night. My half-sister Jess had just finished a short marketing course. Nothing major, not even a degree. But they were all there for her. Celebrating her achievement, like it was some kind of huge milestone. Meanwhile, I had just graduated law school, the first in our entire family to ever do that. And they didn't even bother to lie properly. They couldn't even pretend to care enough to stay consistent with their lie. It wasn't just the disappointment. It was everything that came before it, finally catching up. I started remembering all the other moments when I'd been quietly sidelined. When I didn't get invited to their weekend trips. When they forgot my birthday that one year because they were too busy planning Jess's Sweet 16. When they told me I should be more understanding because Jess was going through a hard time after her mom remarried. It was always about her, and I always tried to be okay with that. I kept telling myself that maybe it wasn't intentional, maybe I was just reading too much into things. But sitting in that Uber, dressed in my cap and gown, watching that story on loop, I realized I'd spent my whole life giving them the benefit of the doubt. And for what? That night, I didn't go to the dinner with my friends. I told them I wasn't feeling well and went back to my apartment. I sat on the couch for hours in silence. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I just felt empty, like I'd finally run out of excuses for them. Like something that had been hanging by a thread inside me just snapped quietly, and I didn't even notice until it was gone. I didn't call them. I didn't text. I just watched that story a few more times, then blocked both my parents on Instagram. It felt small, childish even, but it was all I could do in that moment to not fall apart completely. I needed some kind of line in the sand. Some tiny act of self-respect. And that was it. The next morning, my mom texted me a simple, "Hope everything went well yesterday." That was it. No apology for not coming. No mention of the dinner. No pretending they missed me or were proud. Just a lazy, half-assed message like she was checking a box. I didn't respond. I stared at it for a while and just let it sit there. I think deep down I was waiting to see if she'd follow up, maybe realize I'd seen the story, maybe feel guilty. But nothing else came. No call. No second text. I didn't expect a grand gesture, but I think I expected something. When it didn't come, that hurt more than I thought it would. I told myself I'd move on, just brush it off and focus on what was ahead. But the truth is, it stuck with me. Graduation should have been this turning point in my life, a moment of celebration, of pride. Instead, it felt like the final confirmation of something I tried not to admit to myself for years, that I was always the extra, the optional one. Jess was the golden child, the center. I was the one who figured things out on his own, who didn't need as much attention. That's what they used to say. Daniel's always been so independent. It used to sound like a compliment. Now I know it was just their excuse to be absent without guilt. About a week later, Jess called me out of nowhere. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail saying she wanted to talk, that she didn't know I'd be hurt, and that it wasn't like that. But she knew. She knew it was my graduation night. She posted the damn story, and she chose to do it anyway. I didn't reply. I haven't spoken to her since. Honestly, I don't know what she expected me to say. That it's okay? That I get it. Maybe before that night, I would have tried to smooth it over. But something really did shift inside me. And not in a dramatic, movie-style way. It was just this quiet realization that I didn't need to keep chasing people who never chose me back. What's messed up is that if it had been any other night, I probably would have let it go. I've let so much slide before that it became normal. But this one hit different because it was mine. It was supposed to be mine. Not even about proving anything, just being seen. And not in a flashy, performative way, but really seen. Like, after all the years of grinding, of pushing through without help, maybe they'd finally acknowledge it. Maybe they'd say they were proud. But instead, they celebrated someone else's small win like it was the Super Bowl and left mine in the dark. It made me wonder how many other moments in my life I had downplayed just to avoid being disappointed again. After that, I started looking at a lot of things differently. I stopped making excuses for them when people asked about my family. I used to cover for them, you know? Say they were busy, say we were just not super close. Now I just tell the truth. Not in a bitter, vengeful way. Just in a plain, matter-of-fact tone. Like, yeah, my parents didn't show up to my graduation. They had dinner with my half-sister instead. It still stings to say it out loud, but somehow it also feels like taking back a piece of myself every time I do. Like I'm finally being honest about where I stand in all this. I haven't cut them off entirely. I don't think I ever could, not fully. But the distance is real now. I don't reach out unless I have to, and when they text, I keep it short. I don't visit for holidays. I stop pretending I'm part of something I'm not. It's strange because people assume that pulling away from your family has to come with this big dramatic blowout. But mine didn't. It was more like a slow freeze. A quiet backing away. I don't think they even noticed. And that's probably what hurts the most. A few months later, I saw them again at a family gathering. One of those things I couldn't really avoid without causing more questions than I was ready to answer. It was awkward, but polite. My mom gave me a hug like nothing had happened. My dad gave his usual shoulder pat. We sat through dinner like a bunch of coworkers pretending to be close. Jess wasn't there, which I was grateful for. But even with her gone, it was like the elephant in the room had its own chair at the table. They asked me about work, about the bar exam. I answered in short sentences, smiling when it felt required. Inside, I was counting the minutes till I could leave. What really threw me was when my mom tried to act surprised that I hadn't come to Jess's birthday the month before. She said something like, "We missed you there. Everyone asked about you." I didn't say anything. I just nodded and kept eating. I didn't have it in me to explain that I didn't go because I didn't feel welcome, because I was tired of being the afterthought. They probably saw my silence as being dramatic. But I've learned that sometimes silence is the only thing left when you've already said everything that needed to be said, and no one listened. That night, driving home, I remember thinking how weird it is that people can sit across from each other, share food, talk like everything's fine, and still not actually connect. I realized I'd been doing that my whole life with them, going through the motions, waiting for something real to show up. But it never did. I think some part of me always believed that if I just achieved enough, succeeded enough, they'd finally come around. That they'd be proud, or at least present. Graduation was supposed to be that moment. And when it wasn't, it forced me to accept something I'd been avoiding for years. They don't see me the way I wanted to be seen. Maybe they never did. I think the worst part is that they probably don't even remember that night the way I do. For them, it was just another dinner. Another night out with Jess and her step-family, who they somehow molded into this perfect picture of what family looks like. I don't think they ever stopped to consider how it would feel for me. That I'd see the post. That I'd be sitting there in a rented gown, in a plastic chair under stage lights, scanning the audience for faces that never showed up. That every speech I heard about the people who got us here would land like a punch to the gut. I doubt they even remember what excuse they gave me. That's the part that really messes with my head. A few friends have asked if I ever plan to bring it up to them. Like, sit them down and tell them how much it hurt. But I honestly don't see the point. What would it change? They'd either deny it, say I misunderstood, or pull the usual, "You're being too sensitive." I've been through that loop before. It always ends the same. Me feeling like the bad guy for asking to be treated like I matter. I'm done explaining myself to people who don't want to understand. At some point, you have to stop banging on a locked door and start looking for a different way out. I've started investing more in the relationships that actually give something back. I'm closer now to a couple friends than I ever was to my own family. One of them came to my graduation, sat right up front, and even brought flowers. We weren't even that close at the time, but she showed up. That meant more than I could explain. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to. It's who shows up when it counts. I used to think that idea was just a way for lonely people to cope. But now I get it. I really get it. And it's not sad. It's freeing. I also started therapy a few months after graduation. I didn't go in thinking it was about my family. I just felt stuck in general. But of course, everything circled back to them. The therapist said something that hit me hard. It sounds like you've been grieving a version of your parents that never existed. And yeah, that's exactly it. I kept holding on to this image of who they could be if they just tried. If they just saw me. But they didn't, and maybe they never will. Accepting that doesn't mean I'm okay with it. It just means I've stopped waiting. And that kind of grief is weird. You can't bury it like a person. It just sort of lingers in the background until one day you realize you're not checking your phone, hoping for their name to pop up anymore. There's still a part of me that flinches when I see families hugging at graduations, or when someone posts a throwback photo with their dad at some big event. I don't feel jealous, exactly. More like hollow. Like I missed out on something I didn't even know was missing until I saw what it could look like. But then I remind myself that I made it. Not in a motivational Instagram quote kind of way, but in the real sense. I got through it. I earned that degree. I walked that stage alone and still stood tall. There's a strange kind of pride in that. Quiet, steady, not flashy, but real. I've kept the graduation photo on my desk, the one they take when you're handed the diploma. I look straight at the camera, smiling like someone who had everything under control. Most days, I believe that smile. Some days, I remember what it cost me. But I keep it there as a reminder, not of them, but of me. Of what I did without their help. Of who I became without needing their applause. Maybe one day they'll see it and feel something. Or maybe they won't. But that photo isn't for them anymore. It's for me. Sometimes I wonder if things would have been different if I had called them out earlier. Like, maybe if I had spoken up when I was younger, they would have realized what they were doing. But that thought usually fades fast. I was just a kid trying to keep the peace. Trying not to be a burden. I didn't have the words back then, and honestly, even if I did, I don't think they were listening. The thing about being the easy child is that people assume you don't need much. So they give you less and praise you for being low maintenance. I used to wear that label like a badge of honor. Now it just feels like a polite way of saying they didn't care enough to dig deeper. I've been thinking lately about what kind of parent I'd want to be if I ever have kids. And more than anything, I want them to know they're seen. Not just told good job after something big, but really watched. Heard. Known. I want to be the kind of dad that shows up without needing to be asked. The kind that takes the time to learn what matters to their kid, even if it's not what matters to me. I don't want them to have to prove their worth for my attention. I want them to feel like they're enough simply because they are. That might sound simple, but it's everything I wish I had. It's wild how long you can carry things like this without realizing it. How deep it goes. It took me 26 years to see it clearly. Not because it wasn't there, but because I kept hoping it wasn't. That's the part that stays with me. How much I wanted to believe they were better than they are. how much effort I put into protecting their image in my own mind. That's probably the biggest shift since that night. I stopped protecting their version of the story. I started telling mine. Every once in a while, I still get a message from my mom. Usually something vague, like thinking of you, or hope you're doing well. I never really know how to respond. Part of me wants to ask what exactly she's thinking about, because it sure as hell isn't what she missed. But I don't respond with anger. I just don't respond. I think she senses the distance now, but I doubt she fully understands where it came from. Or maybe she does, and just doesn't want to face it. That's not my problem anymore. I spent too long trying to teach them how to treat me. Now I just walk away when they don't. I used to think closure meant having a big conversation. Like sitting down and spilling everything, getting an apology, maybe even crying it out. But I don't think that's how it really works. At least not for me. My closure came quietly. It came the night I walked off that graduation stage, looked around, and accepted the fact that they weren't coming. That they chose something else. That I was done trying to make it make sense. That night was the ending. Everything since has just been the processing. And weirdly enough, life's been a little lighter since. Not because anything got fixed, but because I stopped waiting. I started making room for people who do show up, even if it's just in small ways. Friends who remember my birthday. Coworkers who ask how I'm really doing. Strangers who say congrats and actually mean it. It doesn't erase the hurt, but it adds something new to balance it. Something I built on my own, without the people I once thought I couldn't live without. I never told anyone this, but the day after graduation, I went back to the auditorium alone. It was open for cleanup, empty rows of chairs half-stacked, programs scattered on the floor, the stage already stripped down. I just stood there for a while, in the middle of that hollow space, trying to understand what had changed. Nothing looked different, but everything felt different. I think I needed to see it without the lights, without the ceremony, without all the fake smiles and polite claps. Just the space where something important was supposed to happen for me, and didn't. That's when it really settled in. This wasn't just about one night. It was about years of bending myself to fit into a version of family that didn't actually include me. Years of laughing at jokes that weren't funny, showing up for birthdays and events and acting like I didn't notice when they forgot mine. That quiet moment, standing there alone with nobody around to clap or pose for pictures, felt more honest than the ceremony itself. And strangely, it gave me peace. Because for once, I wasn't pretending. I wasn't waiting. I was just there, with all of it, finally feeling the weight of what I'd carried, and realizing I could start putting it down. I've told this story to maybe 2 people in real life. One of them cried. The other just nodded and said, "Damn, man." I think part of the reason I'm writing it now is because I know there are other people out there who've had to clap for themselves in rooms that were supposed to be full. People who've had to smile through moments that should have felt like everything, but ended up feeling like nothing because the people they wanted to see it weren't there. Or worse, were just a few blocks away, choosing something else. If you're one of those people, I just want to say, I get it. And you're not dramatic. You're not bitter. You're not wrong for feeling like it matters. Because it does matter. We build our whole lives around the idea of being witnessed. Not by strangers, not by followers, but by the people who were supposed to love us first. And when they don't show up, literally or emotionally, it carves out something deep, something quiet. But that doesn't mean it defines you. It means you learned how to stand on your own. And that's a strength most people will never understand unless they've had to do it. Even now, months later, I still don't have some neat explanation for why they did what they did. I used to obsess over that. Like if I could just understand them, maybe I'd stop hurting. But I think some things don't have clean answers. Sometimes people fail you, not because they're evil, but because they're small, selfish, preoccupied with their own narratives. Maybe one day they'll realize what they missed. Maybe they won't. But it doesn't really matter anymore. That chapter ended the moment I walked off that stage and saw the empty row. It was never about revenge or cutting people off to prove a point. It was about no longer begging for something that should have been freely given. And now, when I think back on that night, I don't just see what was missing. I see who was standing there anyway. Me. I showed up for myself. No applause, no balloons, no forced smiles. Just me. in a moment that should have been shared and somehow still mattered. That's how this story ends. Not with a resolution, but with reality. And I guess, after everything, that's enough.